It's worth noting, Republicans had the House, the Senate, and the presidency up until 2018, but they promise if you give it to them again, something this time will get done. Joining us now to answer whether that's true and this issue more broadly is Amber Athey, the Washington editor for The Spectator. Amber, I'm glad to have you on today because I know that you follow this topic pretty closely. And we had really four of the biggest tech giants on Capitol Hill yesterday. Jack Dorsey, of course, wasn't there from Twitter, but it was still a pretty good showing. So what were your takeaways from yesterday's hearing?
Is very ill-equipped to handle this issue. The reality is that so many of them don't even understand the basic ways that these companies and social media platforms operate. I mean, you had Republicans asking about why their Gmail wasn't working and why they weren't able to send campaign emails to their father. You had one Republican even ask Mark Zuckerberg about something that happened on Twitter. So I'm constantly disappointed when these big tech hearings happen because, I mean, on both sides of the aisle, to be clear, these people really just don't even understand the basics of what they're asking about. So, of course, nothing's going to get done.
I think you're exactly right. And I think anyone under the age of maybe 50 was looking at that hearing and thinking the exact same thing. And, you know, it's problematic, too, because they did have a similar hearing about a year ago. And that was when they were once again asking similar questions about, for example, how Facebook makes money. Rudimentary questions that you have to understand if you want to tackle these issues more broadly. And when it comes to those issues, too, the Democrats kind of took a more antitrust type of approach, maybe about breaking up these big companies. And then conservatives, they also did mention that, but they also took aim at the idea of censorship. Jim Jordan, of course, was the one who I think hit this most hardly, as well as Matt Gaetz. But when we talk about those concerns from Republicans, are they valid?
I think Republicans are kind of missing the point because the reason that censorship is so dangerous and the bias at these companies is so dangerous is precisely because they are so large and have so much power. So it seems to me that Republicans and Democrats are both about half right on this issue. And Jim Jordan, for all of the good questioning that he did yesterday, was apparently sending a memo around to his colleagues, actually asking them to not focus on the antitrust issue because apparently that would make the party look like it was too anti-free market and too anti-capitalist. But you can't talk about bias and censorship without pointing out the fact that it is an issue precisely because these companies have so much power in the marketplace.
And oftentimes, to your point, I hear a lot of more libertarian-minded people bring up that very same thing that you just said, that Jim Jordan was telling people, kind of, well, we don't want to get too involved in private business, or we don't want to be involved in kind of shaking up the free market in any way. But I don't think that a lot of people understand that this isn't a free market type thing. You can't just go out and create your own Google and start competition with Google. I mean, we are so far past that point where at this point it does seem like there needs to be action done from a congressional level, a regulatory level, something done from the government in some way. Because when you look at Amazon, you cannot replicate Amazon. You can't replicate Google. You can't replicate these big companies. Yet here we are. I mean, we've been talking about this issue. We know that conservative voters are talking about this issue very frequently, but there seems to be very little action. Do you suspect that this is the case where we once again won't see much action taken on this front?
Unfortunately, it does. I mean, the best that we are getting from Republicans is a promise to review Section 230. But outside of that, if you're not looking at Senator Josh Hawley, for example, no one in the Republican Party is really taking this issue seriously. They like to talk tough and complain about being censored, but when it comes down to actually doing something about it, these guys just aren't really in it for the long haul.
No, you're right. And it's the same thing that is a little bit aggravating. It's turning into a little bit more of a campaign issue than anything else. Like, give us the House once again and we'll be able to do something. It's the same thing oftentimes that I hear in the Senate when it comes to these FISA abuses or the origins of the Russia investigation, where they actually do have oversight power. They keep talking about it, but there's very little teeth that is behind a lot of these actions. So when it comes to this, though, we saw yesterday Democrats willing to take at least an adversarial approach against these tech giants, conservatives willing to take a adversarial approach to these tech giants as well. There does seem to be at least a potential for bipartisan support. Do you think we will ever get there, or do you think that this is something that we'll talk about at every election year and that's it?
I think Congress is just way too divided right now to really agree on an issue as big as this. And it's really disappointing because, like I mentioned earlier, if they were able to team up on the fact that conservatives don't like being censored, the left doesn't like that these tech companies have so much power, they could easily form a really powerful alliance on this issue. And again, the free market thing is really a red herring because you don't have a free market when you have such a small handful of companies stifling competition. And one of the most important things we learned from the hearing yesterday was that Jeff Bezos essentially admitted that he couldn't guarantee that Amazon was not using seller data in order to make decisions about its own private production, because Amazon, of course, sells its own products through Amazon Basics. They're apparently taking data from the companies that use its platform to sell products to decide what they want to produce, which is by nature fundamentally anti-competitive. That's anti-free market. So this is something that Republicans are going to have to grapple with if they want to create serious change on the issues of big tech. Then they have to just stop complaining every time their Twitter account gets suspended and start looking at the root causes of why these companies have become so powerful.
No, you're exactly right. And even when we look back at the coronavirus pandemic too, while millions of Americans are out of work, are struggling, we have someone like Jeff Bezos who's almost doubling his net worth, making $13 billion in one day. And I'm sorry, but that is not capitalism. That is crony capitalism. That's a failed system in some regard, when someone is able to make more money than they can spend in multiple lifetimes in the matter of 24 hours, while there are people in the streets literally going hungry right now who are facing evictions at the end of this month. It's something that I think lawmakers need to address at some point, because if they don't, they're going to put someone in power who will, because Senator Elizabeth Warren ran on this issue. Josh Hawley, as you mentioned, has even brought this issue up very frequently. There is an appetite to take action, but if these lawmakers don't take action, I think the American people are going to vote in someone who they want to, and someone who will. But Amber Athey, I appreciate you coming on, breaking down the hearing from yesterday and what it means coming in today. Thank you very much.